Hi, I'm Zara. I walked into Uncle Kevin's Thanksgiving dinner wearing my best dress and carrying homemade cranberry sauce, expecting to finally sit at the adults' table. Instead, I found myself standing in the kitchen corner while my sister Brooke announced to everyone that I was still just a waitress and didn't understand real success. They seated me at the kids' table with the teenagers, laughing about how I'd never amount to anything more than serving other people's meals. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But when our waiter Marcus brought out the wine, his face went pale. Not because he recognized me as a customer, but because he recognized me as his boss, the owner of the 3-restaurant empire he worked for. The same woman who'd just been dismissed as a failure by her own family. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who raised you. And sometimes the truth serves itself. The morning light filtered through my downtown Portland apartment windows as I carefully arranged the cranberries in my grandmother's antique bowl. Each berry had to be perfect, nestled between orange zest and fresh rosemary sprigs I'd grown on my fire escape garden. This wasn't just cranberry sauce, it was my peace offering, my attempt to bridge years of family dinners where I'd felt more like hired help than a beloved daughter. I'd been awake since 5, not because I had to be, but because my hands needed something to do while my mind raced. Today was Uncle Kevin's annual Thanksgiving feast, the one event where our entire extended family gathered under one roof in Grandview Hills. The same roof where I'd spent childhood holidays being told to help in the kitchen, while my sister, Brooke, got to socialize with the adults, even when we were both just kids. But today felt different. Today, I was 28, successful, and finally ready to show them I'd become more than they ever imagined. I owned 3 restaurants now. Not just any restaurants, but Meridian Grove locations that had been featured in Portland Monthly and earned recognition from the state's Culinary Association. The flagship location alone employed 47 people and served over 300 customers on busy nights. Yet, as I sealed the cranberry sauce container and checked my reflection one more time, that familiar knot formed in my stomach. The same one I'd carried since childhood. The one that whispered I'd never be good enough for them. My black dress was conservative but elegant, purchased specifically for occasions like this. I wanted to look successful without appearing like I was trying too hard. The line between confidence and desperation had always been razor thin in my family. The drive to Grandview Hills took 45 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that grew progressively more manicured as I climbed into the hills. Uncle Kevin's house sat on 2 acres, complete with a circular driveway and professionally maintained landscaping that probably cost more than most people's rent. I'd always loved this house as a child, but now it felt like a monument to everything my family valued: appearance, status, and the kind of success that could be measured in square footage. Cars already lined the driveway when I arrived. Brooke's white BMW sat closest to the front door, as if claiming territory. My cousin Tyler's truck was there, along with several vehicles I didn't recognize, but assumed belonged to whatever new partners or friends my family had accumulated since our last gathering. I parked at the end of the line, grabbing my cranberry sauce and the bottle of wine I'd selected from my restaurant's carefully curated collection. Aunt Linda opened the door before I could knock, her smile bright, but somehow not reaching her eyes. She wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her hair was styled in that perfect way that only comes from weekly salon appointments. "Zara, sweetheart, you made it," she said, accepting my cheek kiss while simultaneously scanning my appearance. "You look lovely. Still working at that little restaurant downtown?" The question hit like it always did, loaded with assumptions and barely concealed pity. "Something like that," I replied, handing her the wine. "I brought cranberry sauce, too. Grandma's recipe." "Oh, how thoughtful," Aunt Linda said. though her tone suggested homemade, anything was charmingly quaint rather than actually appreciated. Kevin hired a caterer this year, but I'm sure we can find room for it somewhere. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation and the kind of laughter that comes from people who are comfortable in their success. The living room had been transformed into an elegant gathering space with fresh flowers on every surface and ambient lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. Uncle Kevin worked the room like a politician, his booming voice carrying stories about his latest business ventures and golf handicap improvements. I spotted my mother Patricia near the fireplace, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Mom wore navy blue, her silver hair styled in soft waves that framed her face perfectly. She'd always been beautiful, even more so as she aged, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was holding court rather than simply socializing. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine warmth. "There's my youngest," she called out, extending her arms for a hug. "Everyone, this is Zara, my baby girl. She's been working so hard in the restaurant industry." The way she said restaurant industry made it sound like I was struggling to make ends meet rather than running a successful business. The woman she'd been talking to nodded politely, the kind of acknowledgement reserved for someone's disappointing relative who everyone tolerates out of family obligation. "That's wonderful that you're working," the woman said. "Service industry jobs are so important. Everyone needs to start somewhere." I felt my smile tighten, but I maintained my composure. "Yes, it's been quite a journey." Brooke appeared as, if summoned by some invisible signal, gliding across the room in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. She'd always been stunning, with the kind of effortless beauty that made heads turn and conversations pause. Her success in pharmaceutical sales had afforded her a lifestyle that our family understood and celebrated. Corner office, company car, expense account dinners at places like my restaurants. "Zara," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt more performative than affectionate. "I was just telling David about your cute little job. You're still at that same place, right? The one downtown where you work those crazy hours?" David stepped forward, extending his hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested he'd been coached on proper handshake technique. He was exactly the type of man my family approved of, clean-cut, well-dressed, and radiating the confidence that comes from inherited wealth and unexamined privilege. "Nice to meet you, Zara. Brooke tells me you're in food service. That must be challenging work." The condescension dripped from his words like honey from a broken jar. I wanted to tell him about the James Beard nomination my head chef had received, about the waiting list for weekend reservations, about the food critics who'd called my flagship location a revelation in Pacific Northwest cuisine. Instead, I nodded and said, "It has its rewards." Uncle Kevin's voice boomed across the room, calling everyone to gather for dinner. The dining room had been set with his finest china, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight, and centerpieces that looked like they'd been arranged by a professional florist. A long wooden table dominated the space, surrounded by chairs that could have furnished a boardroom. As everyone began to find their seats, I looked for my place card. The adults section filled quickly. Uncle Kevin at the head, Aunt Linda to his right, my mother beside her, then Brooke and David. I searched further down the table, past the prime real estate, past the spots where important conversations would happen. My name wasn't there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Oh, Zara," Aunt Linda called out, noticing my confusion. "I put you over here." She gestured toward a smaller table that had been set up near the kitchen entrance. "I thought you'd be more comfortable with Tyler and the kids." The kids' table? At 28, with my own business and more responsibility than most of the adults in this room, I'd been relegated to the children's section. Tyler, who was 25 and still lived in his parents' basement, waved me over with an apologetic smile. Two actual teenagers sat across from him, Uncle Kevin's business partner's kids who looked mortified to be separated from the adult conversation. "This is perfect," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "I love catching up with family." But as I took my seat on the plastic chair, clearly borrowed from someone's patio set, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break entirely, but develop one of those hairline fractures that would spread with time and pressure. Around the main table, conversation flowed about stock portfolios, vacation homes, and business deals worth more money than most people would see in a lifetime. Tyler leaned over, his voice low. "I'm sorry about this. Mom's been weird about seating arrangements lately. She's got this whole hierarchy thing going on." "It's fine," I replied, unfolding my paper napkin while the adults received cloth ones. "We'll have more fun over here anyway." The teenagers introduced themselves politely, clearly uncomfortable with the awkward family dynamics they'd stumbled into. Sarah was 16 and planning to study culinary arts in college. When she mentioned her interest in restaurant management, her eyes lit up with the kind of passion I remembered feeling at her age. "That's such a cool field," she said. "Do you like working in restaurants? My dad says it's really hard work." "It can be challenging," I admitted, "but incredibly rewarding when you find the right place." From the main table, Brooke's laughter rang out above the general conversation. She was telling a story about her latest business trip, some conference in Miami where she'd closed a major deal. The way she described negotiating with pharmaceutical executives made her sound like a warrior princess conquering corporate kingdoms. "And then I told them," she continued, her voice carrying across the room, "that if they wanted access to our distribution network, they'd need to meet our terms. You have to understand leverage in business. Some people just don't get that concept." Her eyes flicked toward our table for just a moment, and I realized the comment wasn't entirely about her work story. It was about people like me. People she perceived as lacking business acumen because we worked with our hands instead of manipulating spreadsheets. The first course arrived, delivered by servers from a catering company that clearly specialized in high-end events. Professional staff moved efficiently around the room, serving each course with the kind of precision I expected from my own restaurants. I watched their technique, noting how they approached each table, the way they anticipated needs without being intrusive. As the evening progressed, the conversation at the main table grew more animated. Uncle Kevin launched into a detailed explanation of his latest real estate investment, a commercial property development that would transform the downtown corridor. My mother contributed stories about her volunteer work with the hospital auxiliary, the kind of philanthropic involvement that looked impressive on social media. "Community involvement is so important," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had to choose between paying rent and paying for groceries. "It's about giving back when you've been blessed with success." The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume, that some of us had been blessed with success, while others were still struggling to achieve it. I thought about the scholarship fund I'd quietly established for culinary students from low-income families, the way my restaurants partnered with local farms to support sustainable agriculture, the free meals we provided to homeless shelters every holiday season. None of that seemed to register as real contribution in their world. Tyler attempted to engage me in conversation about his plans to finally move out of his parents' house, but I found myself distracted by the performance happening at the adult table. Brooke was describing her condo renovation, the kind of project that required hiring interior designers and contractors who charged more per room than most people made in a year. "The kitchen renovation alone cost $30,000, she said, pausing for the appropriate expressions of awe and approval. "But you have to invest in quality. I learned that from working with high-end clients. They understand that cheap solutions cost more in the long run." Another glance in my direction. Another subtle dig about understanding quality and investment. I cut my turkey carefully, each slice precise and measured, while Sarah asked me questions about different types of cuisine and cooking techniques. At least someone at this table appreciated food as more than just fuel for social networking. The cranberry sauce I'd made sat untouched in the kitchen, forgotten among the professionally catered side dishes that probably cost more per serving than most families spent on entire meals. I'd spent hours perfecting that recipe, testing different combinations of spices and sweetness levels until it matched my memory of Grandma's version. But in this context, homemade seemed amateur rather than thoughtful. As dinner plates were cleared and dessert preparations began, Uncle Kevin stood to make his traditional Thanksgiving toast. He raised his crystal wine glass, the expensive red, liquid catching the candlelight like liquid rubies. "To family," he began, his voice carrying the weight of patriarchal authority. "To the blessings of another successful year, and to the achievements that make us proud to carry the Hoffman name." Everyone raised their glasses, even those of us at the children's table with our plastic cups filled with sparkling cider. But as Uncle Kevin continued his toast, his words began to feel less like gratitude and more like a report card. To Brooke, whose sales numbers this quarter broke company records. To Patricia, whose leadership on the hospital board has raised over $200,000 for new equipment. To Linda, whose real estate expertise helped us close the biggest deal of my career. He continued around the table, highlighting achievements that translated into dollars, status, and social recognition. Each accomplishment was measured in external validation, the kind of success that could be displayed in annual reports and social media posts. When he finished, the silence stretched just long enough for me to realize I hadn't been mentioned. Not my work, not my contributions, not even an acknowledgement that I existed beyond occupying space at the overflow table. The omission felt deliberate, a public confirmation of where I ranked in the family hierarchy. Brooke must have noticed the awkwardness because she quickly raised her own glass. "And to those still working toward their dreams," she added, her smile bright and seemingly supportive. "Everyone has their own timeline for success." The words were meant to sound encouraging, but they landed like a patronizing pat on the head. Still working toward their dreams, as if everything I'd already accomplished was just preparation for real achievement, real success, real contribution to the family name. I smiled and nodded, lifting my plastic cup in acknowledgement of her backhanded generosity. But inside, that hairline crack in my chest spread a little wider, creating space for something I'd never allowed myself to feel fully. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that leads to dramatic confrontations, but the cold, calculating kind that sees clearly and remembers everything. The evening was far from over, and I had a feeling the real story was just beginning. The dessert course arrived with theatrical flair, wheeled in on silver carts that gleamed under the dining room's chandelier. Professional servers moved with choreographed precision, presenting individual chocolate soufflés that rose like small monuments to culinary perfection. The presentation was flawless, each plate garnished with gold leaf and berry compotes arranged in artistic swirls that would photograph beautifully for social media. I watched the service with professional interest, noting the timing, the temperature control, the way each server coordinated their movements to ensure simultaneous presentation at the main table. This was high-end catering at its finest, the kind of operation that charged premium prices for both food and theater. The kind of service I provided at my flagship location, though my family had no idea I understood the intricacies of what they were experiencing. At the children's table, we received the same desserts, though the presentation felt slightly less ceremonious. Sarah, the teenager interested in culinary arts, stared at her soufflé with genuine appreciation. "This is incredible," she whispered, photographing her plate from multiple angles. "Look at how they got the rise so even. The kitchen timing must have been perfect." "The secret is temperature control and precise timing," I found myself explaining, then caught myself before revealing too much knowledge. "At least that's what I've heard from the chefs I work with." Tyler raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He'd always been perceptive, even as a kid, picking up on undercurrents that other family members missed or ignored. Now he studied my face with curiosity, as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite articulate. From the main table, conversation had shifted to holiday plans and winter vacations. Brooke was describing her upcoming trip to Aspen, complete with details about the resort's amenities and the exclusive ski lessons she'd booked. David contributed stories about the private lodge his family owned, the kind of generational wealth that made expensive vacations feel routine rather than special. "We should all plan something together next year," Aunt Linda suggested, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed everyone at the table could afford spontaneous luxury travel. "Maybe that new resort in Cabo that Patricia was telling me about." My mother nodded eagerly. "The one with the private beach access and the golf course designed by that famous architect. I heard they're booking almost 2 years out, but Kevin might have connections." Uncle Kevin leaned back in his chair, wine making him expansive and generous. "I know the developer personally. We went to college together. I could probably get us a group rate for next Thanksgiving." The conversation continued, building momentum around plans that assumed everyone's participation without considering anyone's actual circumstances. They discussed airfare like it was a minor inconvenience, resort fees like pocket change, and week-long vacations like everyone had unlimited paid time off. I calculated quietly in my head. The trip they were casually planning would cost more than many of my employees made in 2 months. More than my scholarship recipients had available for entire semesters of school. The casual assumption that everyone could participate felt like another reminder of how different my world was from theirs, despite my actual financial success. "Zara, you'd love it," Brooke called over to our table, including me in the conversation. For the first time all evening. "Though I know taking time off from work can be complicated in the service industry. Maybe you could save up over the year?" The suggestion was meant to sound supportive, but it carried the same patronizing undertone that had colored her comments all evening. Save up over the year, as if this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity rather than the kind of trip I could book tomorrow if I wanted to. As if my work was so precarious that taking a week off required months of financial planning. "I'll have to see how my schedule looks," I replied diplomatically, not mentioning that I could probably buy the resort they were discussing if I liquidated my business assets. Sarah leaned closer, her voice low. "Are you okay? You seem kind?" Frustrated. I was touched by her perceptiveness and concern. At 16, she was already more emotionally intelligent than most of the adults at the main table. "Just tired," I said. "Long week at work." "What kind of restaurant do you work at?" she asked. "Is it casual dining or more upscale?" The question was innocent, driven by genuine curiosity about a field she wanted to enter. But it forced me to navigate the careful line I'd been walking all evening, answering truthfully without revealing the full scope of my role. "Upscale," I said. "We focus on Pacific Northwest cuisine, locally sourced ingredients, that kind of thing." "That sounds amazing," she said. "Do you get to work with the chefs? Learn about menu development and business operations?" Tyler was listening now too, his attention sharpening. He'd always been smart, probably the most intellectually curious person in our extended family, though his interests in philosophy and creative writing didn't translate into the kind of success our family recognized. "I'm involved in most aspects of the operation," I said carefully. "It's a small enough place that everyone wears multiple hats." Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I want to do. Start somewhere small where I can learn everything, then maybe work up to managing my own place someday." The irony wasn't lost on me. This teenager understood more about career progression in the restaurant industry than my entire family did. She recognized that working in restaurants wasn't about being unable to find real work, but about choosing a field that required expertise, creativity, and business acumen. At the main table, Uncle Kevin was holding court again, this time with stories about his golf club's holiday tournament. The conversation had that comfortable rhythm of people who shared the same social circles, the same reference points, the same assumptions about what constituted a life well lived. The networking opportunities alone make the membership worthwhile, he was saying. Half my biggest deals have started with conversations on the golf course. You have to invest in relationships if you want to succeed in business. Brooke nodded enthusiastically. It's the same in pharmaceutical sales. The real deals happen during dinners and company events, not in boardrooms. You have to understand how to build rapport with clients. David added his own perspective about relationship building in finance, creating a chorus of agreement about the importance of social capital in business success. Their conversation painted a picture of success that required access to exclusive spaces, expensive hobbies, and the kind of inherited cultural knowledge that came from growing up in the right circles. I thought about my own networking, the relationships I'd built with local farmers, wine distributors, food critics, and community leaders. The partnerships that had grown from shared values rather than shared bank account balances. The trust I'd earned from employees who knew I understood their struggles because I'd worked every position in my restaurants myself. But in my family's framework, those relationships didn't count as networking because they weren't transactional enough, weren't expensive enough, weren't exclusive enough to signal real success. The evening continued with coffee service, another perfectly orchestrated performance of hospitality. The servers moved through their choreography with professional grace, offering cream and sugar from silver service sets, adjusting chairs and clearing dessert plates with minimal disruption to conversation. I watched one of the servers closely, something familiar about his movements catching my attention. He was tall, with dark hair and the kind of efficient grace that came from years of fine dining experience. When he approached the main table, to refill wine glasses, I caught a glimpse of his profile. My heart stopped. Marcus Chen, my floor manager at the flagship Meridian Grove location. The same Marcus who'd worked his way up from server to management over 3 years, who knew every detail of our operation, who handled our most demanding customers with professional expertise that made difficult nights run smoothly. What was he doing here? I watched him work, hoping he wouldn't notice me. The catering company must have hired additional staff for tonight's event, pulling experienced servers from other restaurants to handle such an elaborate dinner. It made sense from a business perspective, though it created a complexity I hadn't anticipated. Marcus moved through his service routine with the same attention to detail I'd come to rely on at my restaurant. He anticipated needs before guests expressed them, refilled glasses at precisely the right moment, cleared plates without interrupting conversation. Watching him work in this context, I felt a surge of pride in the standards we maintained at Meridian Grove. He hadn't noticed me yet, focused on his professional responsibilities, and probably not expecting to encounter his employer at a private family gathering. From his perspective, I was just another guest at another upscale dinner, indistinguishable from the dozens of similar events he'd worked over the years. But the coincidence felt loaded with potential energy, like a storm system, building pressure before it moved inland. Tyler excused himself to use the restroom, and Sarah began scrolling through her phone, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the first time all evening. I found myself studying the dynamics at the main table with new eyes, seeing the performance from a different angle. My family's conversation had shifted to discussing other people, the kind of social analysis that felt like sport among their circles. They dissected mutual acquaintances' life choices, business decisions, and relationship dramas, with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely believed their opinions mattered beyond their own dining room. "Did you hear about the Richardsons' divorce?" Aunt Linda was saying, her voice carrying the tone of someone sharing particularly juicy gossip. "Apparently, it's gotten quite messy. Something about hidden assets and business partnerships." "I'm not surprised," my mother replied. "Jennifer always seemed to have unrealistic expectations about money. Some people just don't understand financial responsibility." The irony was remarkable. These were people who spent more on wine than Many families spent on groceries, criticizing others for financial irresponsibility. People who inherited their opportunities discussing others' unrealistic expectations. Brooke leaned into the conversation with obvious relish. It's always the ones who marry up that cause the most problems. They never quite fit into the lifestyle, you know? They try too hard to prove they belong. Her words hit like ice water, even though they weren't directed at me. The casual cruelty of dismissing someone's worth based on their background, the easy assumption that some people naturally belonged in wealth while others were perpetual outsiders trying too hard. I wondered if that's how they saw me, as someone trying too hard to prove I belonged at their table. The irony burned. I'd succeeded beyond most of their measures, but because my success didn't look like theirs, it remained invisible. Marcus approached our table to refill water glasses, his professional smile warm but impersonal. He moved efficiently, focusing on his task without really looking at the guests he was serving. Standard protocol for high-end service, maintaining professional boundaries while providing excellent hospitality. I kept my head slightly turned, hoping to avoid direct eye contact until I could figure out how to handle this situation. The last thing I wanted was a scene that would disrupt the evening or create awkward questions I wasn't ready to answer. But as Marcus reached for my water glass, something made him pause. Maybe it was my profile. Maybe my voice when I quietly thanked him. Maybe just the sudden recognition that happens when we encounter familiar people in unexpected contexts. He looked directly at me, and I watched his professional composure flicker, with confusion, then recognition, then something approaching shock. "Ms. Hoffman," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that neither of us had anticipated. Around the table, conversation continued without interruption, but I could feel the moment stretching, becoming significant in ways that would ripple outward from this single exchange. Tyler returned from the restroom just as Marcus stepped back from our table, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes still wide with surprise. He moved toward the kitchen with professional composure, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight hesitation in his usually fluid movements. "Everything okay?" Tyler asked, settling back into his chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," I repeated, though my heart was racing now. "It's been a long day." Sarah looked up from her phone, catching the tail end of our exchange. "Was that server someone you know? He seemed surprised to see you." The teenager's perceptiveness was becoming problematic. I could deflect Tyler's casual concern, but Sarah's genuine curiosity about the restaurant industry made her more likely to notice professional connections and ask follow-up questions. "We might have crossed paths at some industry event," I said vaguely. "Portland's restaurant scene is pretty small." It wasn't entirely untrue, though it drastically understated the relationship. Marcus wasn't just someone I'd met at an industry event. He was someone who reported to me weekly, who helped make hiring decisions, who knew the intimate details of my business operations. Someone who knew exactly how successful I actually was. From the kitchen, I could hear the muffled sounds of catering staff coordinating cleanup and preparation for the final course. Somewhere in that controlled chaos, Marcus was probably trying to process what he'd just discovered, trying to reconcile his employer with the woman sitting at the children's table at a family gathering. At the main table, conversation had moved onto holiday shopping and gift-giving strategies. Brooke was describing her approach to Christmas presents, the kind of thoughtful consumption that required personal shoppers and unlimited budgets. "I always try to find something unique," she was saying. "Something that shows I really understand the person's taste and lifestyle. Price isn't really the issue, it's about finding the perfect fit." Uncle Kevin nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between giving gifts and giving thoughtful gifts. Anyone can buy expensive things, but it takes real consideration to find something meaningful." The sentiment was lovely in theory, though I couldn't remember the last time any of them had given me a gift that suggested they understood my interests or lifestyle. Their presence tended toward generic luxury items, the kind of safe choices that signaled expense without requiring actual knowledge of the recipient. Last Christmas, Brooke had given me a spa package at an upscale resort, complete with massage therapy and aromatherapy treatments. The gift was generous and expensive, but it reflected her own preferences rather than mine. She couldn't have known that I preferred hiking and outdoor activities to spa treatments, because she'd never asked about my interests. Similarly, my mother's gifts tended toward clothing and accessories that reflected her taste rather than mine. Beautiful items that remained unworn in my closet because they didn't match my actual lifestyle or preferences. The pattern extended beyond gift-giving to every aspect of our relationship. They made assumptions about what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy, without ever asking for my input. Their generosity was real but misdirected, based on their perception of who I should be rather than who I actually was. Marcus returned from the kitchen, moving through the dining room with renewed professional focus. He avoided eye contact with our table, maintaining the careful distance that his role required, but I could sense his awareness of me, the way his movements became slightly more careful when he approached our section of the room. The final course arrived with less fanfare than dessert had received. Small plates of cheese and fruit, arranged with artistic precision and accompanied by select wines that Uncle Kevin had chosen from his personal collection. The conversation at the main table became more relaxed, wine and good food creating the kind of comfortable atmosphere that encouraged sharing and reflection. "This has been such a wonderful evening," Aunt Linda said, raising her glass in another informal toast. "It's so important to maintain family traditions, especially in these busy times." Everyone murmured agreement, the kind of satisfied consensus that comes at the end of successful social events. They'd accomplished what they'd set out to do, gathered the family, demonstrated their hospitality, reinforced their social bonds and shared values. But sitting at the children's table, watching Marcus navigate around the room while carefully avoiding our section, I felt the weight of everything that remained unspoken. The success they couldn't see, the assumptions they wouldn't question, the relationships they didn't understand. Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying the main table with the kind of analytical distance that made him an outsider in his own family. "Do you ever feel like we're watching a play?" he asked quietly. "Like they're all performing their roles and we're just the audience?" His observation was more perceptive than he probably realized. The main table did feel performative, each person playing their assigned role in the family drama. Successful businessman, philanthropic mother, rising star, supportive partner. Everyone knew their lines, their blocking, their character motivations. "What role do you think I'm playing?" I asked. Tyler considered the question seriously. "The struggling younger sister who hasn't found her place yet. Though I'm not sure. That's actually who you are." Before I could respond, Sarah looked up from her phone with excitement. "Oh my God, you guys have to see this. I was looking up that restaurant Zara mentioned, the Pacific Northwest Place, and look what I found." My blood turned to ice water as she turned her phone screen toward us. On the display was the Meridian Grove website, featuring professional photos of the dining room, the kitchen, and prominently displayed a photo of me in chef's whites standing next to my head chef. The caption read, "Owner Zara Hoffman and executive chef Jonathan Mills celebrate Meridian Grove's James Beard nomination for Outstanding Restaurant." Tyler's eyes went wide. Sarah stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Wait," Sarah said slowly. "This is you. You're not just a server at this restaurant. You own it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a kitchen fire, impossible to contain once released. Around us, the evening continued its elegant progression, but at our small table, everything had changed. Tyler leaned forward, his voice barely above. A whisper. Zara. What the hell is going on? The silence at our table stretched like taffy, sweet and sticky and impossible to break cleanly. Sarah's phone screen glowed between us, displaying my professional headshot alongside accolades I'd worked years to earn. Tyler's mouth hung slightly open, his analytical mind clearly racing to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics. "Say something," Sarah whispered, her teenage excitement barely contained. "This is incredible. You own 3 restaurants? The article says you employ over 100 people." I glanced toward the main table, where conversation continued its oblivious flow. Uncle Kevin was describing his latest golf tournament victory in elaborate detail, complete with hand gestures demonstrating his winning putt. No one had noticed the small revelation happening 15 feet away. "Please keep your voices down," I said quietly, taking Sarah's phone to examine the damage. The article was from Portland Monthly, published just 2 months ago. The photographer had captured me in my element, confident and professional in my kitchen whites, discussing sustainable sourcing practices and community partnerships with obvious expertise. Tyler leaned closer, studying the screen over my shoulder. "Zara, this doesn't make sense. Why are you sitting at the kids' table if you're more successful than half the people at that table?" The question hit like a physical blow, forcing me to confront the absurdity of my situation. Here I was, hiding my achievements from people who'd just spent 3 hours discussing the importance of business acumen and networking, while they dismissed me as someone still working toward their dreams. "It's complicated," I said, handing the phone back to Sarah. "No, it's really not," Tyler replied, his voice gaining intensity despite his efforts to stay quiet. "You've let them treat you like you're some kind of charity case when you're probably the most successful person in this room." Sarah scrolled through more search results, her eyes widening with each discovery. "Look at these reviews. 5 stars. Everywhere. James Beard nomination. Oregon Restaurant Association's Young Entrepreneur of the Year. Zara, you're like famous in the food world." The teenager's enthusiasm was infectious, but it also highlighted the growing complexity of my situation. Every moment that passed without revealing the truth made the eventual revelation more dramatic, more potentially explosive. From across the room, I caught Marcus moving between tables, his professional composure intact, but his awareness of our conversation obvious in the careful way he avoided looking in our direction. He knew exactly what was being discovered at our table, and his discretion felt both professional and protective. "Why haven't you told them?" Sarah asked, her curiosity genuinely puzzled rather than judgmental. "I mean, if my family thought I was struggling and I actually owned successful businesses, I'd want them to know." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Seriously, Zara, Brooke spent half the evening talking about her sales numbers and you're sitting here letting everyone think you can't afford to go on vacation with them." The irony wasn't lost on me. I could afford to take them all on vacation, could probably buy Uncle Kevin's house if I wanted to, could certainly match Brooke's income and lifestyle if those were my priorities. But explaining why I'd hidden my success would require admitting how deeply their assumptions had hurt, how tired I'd become of fighting for recognition and respect. "Sometimes it's easier to let people believe what they want to believe," I said finally. "That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard," Tyler replied. "And I'm the one who lives in my parents' basement writing poetry that no one reads." Sarah had moved on to the Meridian Grove social media accounts, scrolling through photos of elaborate tasting menus, wine pairing events, and community fundraising dinners. Each image told the story of a thriving business built on excellence and innovation, the kind of success story that should have made any family proud. "This charity dinner you hosted last month raised $50,000 for homeless services," she read aloud. "And this farm-to-table event featured produce from 12 local organic farms. Zara, you're not just running restaurants, you're like leading community change." The validation felt overwhelming after an evening of subtle dismissal and condescension. Sarah's genuine excitement about my work reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the restaurant industry in the first place, why the long hours and constant pressure felt worthwhile when they resulted in genuine impact. But it also highlighted the gulf between my actual life and my family's perception of it. They saw community involvement as charity galas and hospital board meetings, not as sourcing practices and employee benefits and neighborhood revitalization efforts. Their version of giving back required writing checks. Mine required building systems that sustained themselves. Marcus approached our table again, this time to clear the cheese course plates. His movements were carefully neutral, but as he reached for my plate, he leaned slightly closer. "Ms. Hoffman," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but is everything all right? You seem different tonight." The question was loaded with concern and confusion. Marcus knew me as a confident business owner who commanded respect from staff and customers alike. Seeing me relegated to the children's table at my own family gathering must have been jarring, maybe even troubling. "Everything's fine, Marcus," I replied, using his name deliberately to acknowledge our professional relationship. "Just family dinner dynamics." Tyler's eyes sharpened at the exchange. "You two definitely know each other." Marcus glanced between us, clearly uncertain about how much he should reveal. Professional discretion was part of his training, but this situation fell outside normal protocols. "Marcus is my floor manager at Meridian Grove," I said, making the decision to trust Tyler and Sarah with more truth. "He's probably wondering why his boss is sitting at the kids' table." Sarah's gasp was audible. "Oh my God, this is like a movie. Your own employee is serving dinner to your family who doesn't know you're his boss." The teenager's delight in the irony was infectious, but it also highlighted how surreal the situation had become. Marcus nodded politely and retreated toward the kitchen, but not before I caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Tyler shook his head in amazement. "Zara, this is insane. You have to tell them." "Tell them what, exactly?" I asked. "That I've been successful this whole time? That their assumptions about my life have been completely wrong? That while they've been pitying me, I've been building something they couldn't even comprehend?" "Yes," Tyler said emphatically. "All of that. Exactly that." Sarah nodded in agreement. "They should know who you really are. It's not fair to you, and honestly, it's not fair to them either. They're missing out on knowing how amazing you actually are." The sentiment was touching, but it revealed the teenager's optimistic belief. That truth automatically led to understanding and acceptance. She couldn't yet comprehend how people could dismiss evidence that contradicted their preferred narratives, how families could maintain comfortable fictions rather than confront uncomfortable realities. From the main table, Aunt Linda's voice carried across the room. "Zara, sweetheart, would you mind helping me get the coffee service ready? The catering staff is finishing up, but I could use an extra pair of hands in the kitchen." The request felt automatic, the assumption that I would naturally help with service while the other adults continued their socializing. Even at my own family gathering, I was expected to transition seamlessly from guest to staff, to make myself useful in ways that reinforced rather than challenged their perceptions of my role. "Of course," I replied, standing to follow her toward the kitchen. Sarah grabbed my arm gently. "This is your chance," she whispered urgently. "Tell her while you're alone." Tyler nodded in support. "She's right. Start with one person, ease them into it." But as I followed Aunt Linda toward the kitchen, I felt the familiar weight of family expectations settling around my shoulders, like a heavy coat. In this space, I was still the younger niece who could be counted on to help without complaint, to make herself useful without seeking recognition. The kitchen was a marvel of professional efficiency, with the catering staff coordinating final cleanup while maintaining the pristine standards expected for high-end events. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under bright work lights, and every tool and ingredient had been organized with military precision. Marcus was directing the breakdown process, his management skills on full display as he coordinated timing and responsibilities among the temporary staff. Watching him work in this environment, I felt a surge of professional pride. He'd absorbed the leadership lessons we'd discussed at Meridian Grove and was applying them seamlessly in this new context. "The service tonight has been exceptional," Aunt Linda said, surveying the organized chaos with obvious satisfaction. "Kevin's assistant found this catering company through some business connection. They really know what they're doing." I nodded in agreement, not mentioning that I could have recommended several companies with similar capabilities, or that Marcus's expertise was the reason tonight's service had gone so smoothly. "Would you mind arranging these on the serving tray?" Aunt Linda asked, gesturing toward an elaborate coffee service set. "I want to present it nicely when we return to the dining room." The task was simple but telling. Even in the kitchen, surrounded by professional staff who understood complex service protocols, Aunt Linda automatically assigned me the supporting role. Not because I lacked capability, but because she couldn't imagine me in any other context. As I arranged cream pitchers and sugar bowls with the precision I'd learned from managing my own service standards, Marcus approached with a clipboard full of event details. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said to Aunt Linda with professional courtesy. "I need to confirm the final head count for billing purposes. How many guests were served tonight?" 14, Aunt Linda replied. 12 adults and 2 teenagers. Marcus made a note on his clipboard, then glanced meaningfully in my direction. "And would you like us to include a service charge for the restaurant consultation services?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Aunt Linda looked confused, clearly not understanding the reference. "I'm sorry, consultation services?" she asked. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but I could see the slight tension around his eyes. He was creating an opening, offering me a chance to reveal my expertise without making the revelation himself. "Some of our clients request menu planning or event coordination advice," he explained smoothly. "I noticed one of your guests has extensive restaurant industry experience." Aunt Linda looked around the kitchen, her gaze settling on me with obvious confusion. "Oh, you mean Zara. She works at a restaurant downtown, but I don't think she does consulting." The moment stretched between us, loaded with potential energy. I could deflect, minimize, continue the careful charade I'd maintained all evening. Or I could step into the opening Marcus had created and finally tell the truth. "Actually," I said quietly, "I own the restaurant Marcus works at. 3 of them, actually." Aunt Linda's expression shifted through several stages: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and something approaching shock. She looked between Marcus and me, searching for signs that this was some kind of joke or misunderstanding. "I'm sorry, what?" she said. Marcus nodded confirmingly. "Ms. Hoffman is the owner and founder of Meridian Grove Restaurants. I'm her floor manager at the flagship location." The words hung in the kitchen air, mixing with the lingering aromas of dinner service and the underlying tension of family secrets finally exposed. Aunt Linda stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time all evening. "Zara, this doesn't make sense," she said slowly. "If you own restaurants, why didn't you say anything? Why are you letting everyone think you're struggling?" The question was fair but complicated, requiring me to explain years of family dynamics and assumptions that had calcified into unexamined truth. How could I tell her that I'd stopped trying to correct their perceptions because the effort felt futile? That their vision of success was so narrow that my achievements didn't register as legitimate? "I tried to tell people early on," I said, "but the conversations always seemed to slide past it. Everyone had already decided what my life looked like, and contradictory information didn't seem to stick." Aunt Linda shook her head, still processing. "But restaurants, Zara. Successful ones. Why would you keep that secret?" "It wasn't supposed to be a secret," I replied. I just got tired of explaining myself to people who weren't really listening. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. If you'll excuse me, I should check on the cleanup progress. Ms. Hoffman, it's been a pleasure working with you tonight, even in this unusual capacity. His professional grace in navigating the awkwardness was exactly why I'd promoted him to management. He understood when to provide information and when to provide space, when to support and when to step back. As Marcus left us alone in the kitchen, Aunt Linda continued to stare at me with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. Zara, honey, I had no idea. We all thought. I mean, when you said you worked in restaurants, we assumed. You assumed I was a server or maybe a line cook, I finished. Someone working towards something better rather than someone who'd already built something significant. The accuracy of my statement was written across her face. She had assumed exactly that, and the realization that her assumptions had been completely wrong was clearly uncomfortable. But why didn't you correct us? Why sit at the children's table and let Brooke talk about success like you wouldn't understand? The question revealed how little she understood about family dynamics, about how exhausting it becomes to constantly advocate for your own recognition. How sometimes it's easier to accept diminished expectations than to fight the same battle repeatedly. Because correcting people gets tiring, I said. Because success that doesn't look familiar gets dismissed as not really counting. Because I got tired of proving myself to people who should have believed in me from the beginning. Aunt Linda's face crumpled slightly, and I realized she was beginning to understand the impact of the evening's casual dismissals and patronizing comments. Oh, honey, she said softly, we've been horrible, haven't we? The acknowledgement felt both validating and sad. Horrible wasn't quite the right word, but thoughtless certainly applied. Narrow-minded definitely fit. Unwilling to expand their definition of success to include achievements that didn't match their template. From the dining room, voices called for coffee service, interrupting our kitchen revelation. Aunt Linda looked toward the door, then back at me, clearly torn between immediate social obligations and the larger conversation we'd just begun. We should rejoin the others, I said. But Linda, I'd appreciate it if you let me decide how and when to share this information with everyone else. She nodded quickly. Of course, but Zara, this changes everything. Kevin needs to know. Your mother needs to know. They'll be so proud. The optimism in her voice was touching, but naive. Pride required recognizing the value of what I'd accomplished, and I wasn't convinced my family was ready for that level of perspective shift. As we prepared to return to the dining room with the coffee service, Aunt Linda paused at the kitchen door. Can I ask you something? She said. If you're this successful, why do you still come to these family gatherings? Why put yourself through evenings like tonight? The question was more perceptive than I'd expected, cutting to the heart of why I continued to show up for events where I felt diminished and misunderstood. Because they're still my family, I said simply, and because I keep hoping that someday they'll see me clearly. Aunt Linda's eyes filled with tears. I think tonight might be that someday. But as we walked back toward the dining room, carrying our carefully arranged coffee service, I wondered if she was right. Revealing the truth was only the first step. The real test would be whether my family could adjust their perceptions to accommodate reality, or whether they'd find ways to minimize and dismiss my success to maintain their comfortable assumptions. The evening was far from over, and the most challenging conversations were still ahead. The coffee service felt different when we returned to the dining room. Aunt Linda's hands trembled slightly as she set the silver tray on the sideboard, and I could feel her stealing glances at me when she thought no one else was looking. The knowledge she now carried seemed to weigh on her, changing the atmosphere around our small section of the room, even though the main table's conversation continued unchanged. Tyler and Sarah looked up expectantly as I reclaimed my seat at the children's table. Their eyes searched my face for clues about what had transpired in the kitchen, and Sarah's barely contained excitement suggested she was hoping for dramatic revelations. Well? Tyler whispered as Uncle Kevin launched into another golf story. Did you tell her? I nodded slightly, watching Aunt Linda distribute coffee cups with uncharacteristic nervousness. She kept pausing mid-motion, as if processing new information, while trying to maintain normal social rhythms. Sarah's eyes widened. What did she say? Is she going to tell everyone? She's processing, I replied quietly. It's a lot to take in. From across the room, Marcus moved through final service preparations with his usual professional efficiency. But I noticed him positioning himself strategically, always within earshot of our table, ready to provide support or damage control, if the situation escalated beyond my comfort level. At the main table, Brooke was describing her company's holiday party, complete with details about the venue, catering, and entertainment that had been arranged for their celebration. Her voice carried the satisfied tone of someone accustomed to luxury events, someone who assumed everyone shared her frame of reference for what constituted impressive hospitality. The venue alone cost more than most people's annual salaries, she was saying with obvious pride. But the company spares no expense when it comes to employee appreciation. It's all about demonstrating value and setting the right tone. Uncle Kevin nodded approvingly. That's smart business. Investing in employee morale pays dividends in productivity and retention. You have to understand the psychology of motivation. Their conversation about employee appreciation struck me as particularly ironic, given that they'd spent the evening treating me like hired help, while I actually employed more people than any of them. My restaurant staff received comprehensive health benefits, profit-sharing bonuses, and educational support that most companies in their industries didn't offer. David contributed his own perspective about corporate culture and employee engagement, creating a chorus of agreement about the importance of recognizing and rewarding talent. The discussion painted them as enlightened leaders who understood human psychology and business dynamics. Meanwhile, I sat 15 feet away, unrecognized, and unrewarded by the people who claimed to understand the value of appreciating contributions. Tyler leaned closer, his voice barely audible. This is killing me. Listening to them talk about business success while you're sitting here like some kind of invisible person. Sarah nodded vigorously. It's like watching a really frustrating movie where you want to yell at the screen. Their support felt more validating than my family's praise would have, probably because it came from people who could see the situation clearly rather than through the filter of their own assumptions and biases. Aunt Linda returned from the kitchen, settling into her chair with obvious distraction. She kept glancing between the main table conversation and our smaller gathering, clearly struggling with the disconnect between what was being discussed and what she now knew about my actual circumstances. Uncle Kevin raised his coffee cup in another informal toast. To another successful year of growth and achievement, we've all got reasons to be proud of what we've accomplished. The toast felt like a pointed exclusion, a reminder that success was measured by metrics they understood and recognized. Around the main table, people murmured agreement and shared satisfied glances, secure in their mutual appreciation of each other's achievements. But Aunt Linda's response was noticeably delayed, her smile forced and uncomfortable. She raised her cup dutifully, but without enthusiasm, her newfound knowledge creating cognitive dissonance between the family narrative and reality. Brooke launched into a detailed recap of her quarterly performance reviews, describing metrics and bonuses with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the family hierarchy of success. Her achievements were real and impressive within their context, but her presentation assumed everyone else aspired to similar recognition. The key is understanding what clients really value, she explained, directing her comments toward the why. Entire table. Surface-level service isn't enough anymore. You have to anticipate needs, exceed expectations, create experiences that clients remember and recommend. The irony was breathtaking. She was describing exactly what I did every night. At my restaurants, the philosophy that had earned us James Beard recognition and waiting lists for reservations. But because my success didn't match her template, She delivered the advice as if I couldn't possibly understand sophisticated client relations. Tyler's jaw clenched visibly. I can't take much more of this. Sarah was scrolling through her phone, again pulling up more articles about my restaurants and achievements. Look at this review from Food and Wine magazine, she whispered, turning the screen toward me. They called your tasting menu a masterclass in Pacific Northwest cuisine and said your wine program rivals establishments with decades more experience. The validation was wonderful, but it also highlighted the absurdity of hiding accolades that any family should have celebrated enthusiastically. These were the kinds of achievements that typically generated proud social media posts and excited phone calls to distant relatives. Instead, I was sitting at the children's table while my family discussed the importance of exceeding client expectations, completely unaware that I'd built 3 businesses on exactly that principle. Marcus approached the main table to discuss final service details with Uncle Kevin, his professional demeanor impeccable despite the surreal circumstances. I watched him navigate the conversation with diplomatic skill, acknowledging Uncle Kevin's authority as the host while maintaining his own professional standards. The evening has been flawlessly executed, Uncle Kevin told him with the magnanimous approval of someone accustomed to excellent service. Your team's attention to detail has been exceptional. Marcus nodded graciously. Thank you, sir. Excellence is our standard, and we're fortunate to work for an organization that supports those principles. The response was perfectly professional, but I caught the subtle emphasis on organization and supports those principles. Marcus was carefully crediting the leadership structure that had trained him, without explicitly revealing my role in that development. Uncle Kevin looked pleased with the compliment to his event planning choices. It shows. Quality recognizes quality. I'll definitely recommend your services to my business associates. We'd appreciate that very much, Marcus replied. Our owner has built the company on relationships with discerning clients who value exceptional experiences. Another careful reference to ownership and company culture, delivered with enough professionalism to avoid raising questions while still acknowledging the truth of our business relationship. Brooke overheard the exchange and inserted herself into the conversation with typical confidence. What kind of events do you typically cater? Corporate functions? Private parties? Marcus smiled politely. We serve a diverse clientele. Our restaurants handle everything from intimate dinners to large corporate events, always with the same commitment to excellence. Restaurants? Brooke repeated with interest. So this is a sideline for your main business? Not exactly, Marcus said carefully. Tonight's service is provided by staff from our restaurant locations. We often assist with special events when our schedules permit. The explanation was accurate but incomplete, designed to satisfy curiosity without revealing information I hadn't authorized him to share. His discretion was exactly what I'd come to expect from his management approach. Uncle Kevin nodded approvingly. Smart business model. Diversifying revenue streams while maintaining quality standards. Your owner clearly understands market dynamics. Yes, sir, Marcus agreed. She's built something quite remarkable. The pronoun hung in the air for a moment, and I saw Brooke's expression sharpen with curiosity. Female restaurant owners were still relatively uncommon, especially one successful, enough to employ catering quality staff for private events. She? Brooke asked with obvious interest. How impressive. What's her background? Culinary school? Business training? Marcus glanced almost imperceptibly in my direction before responding. She worked her way up through every aspect of restaurant operations, self-taught in many areas, but with an intuitive understanding of both culinary excellence and business management. The description was accurate and complimentary without revealing identifying details. Marcus was walking a professional tightrope, providing information that satisfied questions while respecting my privacy. That's inspiring, my mother chimed in from across the table. It's wonderful when women succeed in traditionally male-dominated industries. though I imagine it must be incredibly challenging to build that kind of business from scratch. The challenges are significant, Marcus agreed. But she's created something that serves the community while providing excellent employment opportunities. Her staff loyalty is remarkable. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly struggling with the disconnect between this conversation about an accomplished female restaurant owner and her recent discovery about my actual identity. Sarah leaned closer to me, her excitement barely contained. "He's talking about you," she whispered urgently. "Right in front of them, and they have no idea." Tyler shook his head in amazement. "This is like watching a really elaborate magic trick. The truth is right there, but they can't see it." The conversation at the main table continued, with Brooke asking increasingly detailed questions about restaurant operations and market positioning. Her curiosity seemed genuine, perhaps sparked by recognition that successful restaurant ownership required sophisticated business skills. "What's her approach to staff development?" Brooke asked. "Employee retention is such a challenge in hospitality." Marcus smiled, and I could see genuine pride in his expression. "She promotes from within whenever possible, provides comprehensive training, and treats staff as partners in the business rather than just employees. The result is unusually low turnover and high performance standards." "That's smart management," Uncle Kevin observed. "Investing in human capital pays long-term dividends. Too many businesses focus on short-term cost savings instead of building sustainable operations." The irony was becoming almost painful. They were praising business practices I'd implemented, employee relations I'd developed, management philosophy I'd created, while simultaneously dismissing me as someone who wouldn't understand sophisticated business concepts. David joined the conversation with questions about financial management and growth strategies, creating an impromptu business school seminar about restaurant industry success factors. Their questions were intelligent, and their observations astute, demonstrating exactly the kind of business acumen they assumed I lacked. "Market positioning must be crucial in such a competitive industry," David said. "How does she differentiate her establishments from other upscale dining options?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. Community integration is central to her approach. Local sourcing, partnerships with area farms, support for culinary education programs. She's built restaurants that serve as community anchors rather than just dining destinations. "That's sophisticated marketing," Brooke said with obvious approval. "Creating brand identity through social responsibility. Very current business thinking." The praise felt surreal. Validation of my business philosophy delivered by people who'd spent the evening treating me like someone incapable of understanding current business thinking. Aunt Linda excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to check on dessert preparations. But as she passed our table, she paused and leaned down to whisper in my ear. "I can't take much more of this," she said quietly. "They're literally describing your achievements while you sit here being ignored. It's making me sick." Her distress was genuine and touching, but it also highlighted how uncomfortable truth could become when it contradicted cherished assumptions. She was experiencing cognitive dissonance between the family narrative and reality, and the experience was clearly unsettling. Tyler caught the exchange and raised an eyebrow questioningly. Sarah was practically vibrating with suppressed excitement, clearly ready for the dramatic revelation she sensed building toward explosion. At the main table, the conversation had evolved into broader discussion about entrepreneurship and women in business. My mother was sharing stories about female executives she knew through her volunteer work, painting them as exceptional individuals who'd overcome significant obstacles to achieve success. "It's all about perseverance and vision," she said with authority. "Women who succeed at that level have to be twice as good and work twice as hard as their male counterparts." The observation was accurate in many industries, including mine. But the way she delivered it suggested she was discussing abstract concepts rather than realities that might apply to anyone in her immediate family. Brooke nodded sagely. "Exactly. Success requires sacrifice and dedication that not everyone is willing to make. It's about prioritizing long-term goals over short-term comfort. Their discussion about successful women felt like academic analysis rather than personal recognition. They could appreciate female achievement in theory while remaining blind to it in practice, especially when it didn't match their preconceptions about what success looked like. Marcus completed his final service duties and approached Uncle Kevin with a leather portfolio containing billing information and business cards. The transaction was handled with professional courtesy, but I noticed Marcus positioning himself, where both our table and the main table could hear his final comments. "Thank you again for choosing our services," he said to Uncle Kevin. "If you have questions about our restaurant locations or would like to schedule a dining experience, all our contact information is included." Uncle Kevin accepted the portfolio with the satisfied air of someone who'd successfully hosted an impressive event. "Excellent work tonight. I'll certainly keep your restaurants in mind for future business entertainment." "We'd be honored to serve you," Marcus replied. "Our owner takes personal pride in every guest experience." As Marcus prepared to leave with the catering team, he paused at our table one final time. His voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Ms. Hoffman, it's been a pleasure working with you this evening. I'll see you at the restaurant Monday morning for our weekly management meeting." The words dropped into the dining room like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in expanding circles of realization and shock. Brooke's head snapped up from her conversation. Uncle Kevin paused mid-sentence, his portfolio hanging forgotten in his hands. My mother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry," Brooke said slowly, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "Did he just call you Ms. Hoffman?" The question hung in the suddenly silent dining room, loaded with implications that would reshape everything they thought they knew about our family dynamics. Sarah grinned triumphantly. Tyler leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. Aunt Linda returned from the kitchen just in time to witness the moment of truth she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, and I found myself at the center of attention for the first time all evening, with nowhere left to hide and no more reasons to deflect. The performance was finally over, and the real conversation was about to begin. The silence stretched across the dining room like a held breath. Every conversation suspended as the implications of Marcus's words settled into the collective consciousness. 14 pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition. Brooke was the first to break the quiet, her voice sharp with confusion. "Zara, what is he talking about? Why would your waiter have a management meeting with you?" The question revealed how completely she'd misunderstood the situation, still assuming I was the employee rather than the employer. Even with Marcus's clear reference to me as Ms. Hoffman and his mention of restaurant ownership throughout the evening, she couldn't make the conceptual leap to reality. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 28 years of family assumptions finally ready to crumble. Because Marcus isn't my waiter. He's my floor manager. At my restaurant. Uncle Kevin's portfolio slipped from his hands, business cards, and billing information scattering across the hardwood floor. "Your restaurant?" "My restaurants," I corrected gently. 3 of them. Meridian Grove is the flagship location, but we have 2 other establishments in Portland, and 1 opening in Seattle next spring. My mother's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down with unsteady hands. "Zara, what are you saying? You work at a restaurant, you don't own restaurants." The statement hung in the air, revealing the fundamental disconnect between their perceptions and my reality. Even faced with direct contradiction, she instinctively rejected information that didn't fit her established framework. Sarah could barely contain her excitement, holding up her phone with my professional photos still displayed. "She owns them, Mrs. Hoffman. Look, here's an article from Portland Monthly, and this one from Food and Wine magazine. She's been nominated for a James Beard Award." Tyler joined the revelation with obvious satisfaction. She employs over 100 people. Her restaurants have 5-star reviews everywhere. She's basically famous in the food industry. The teenager's enthusiasm provided a stark contrast to the adult's stunned silence. Sarah and Tyler had processed the information quickly and completely, while the rest of my family struggled to reconcile years of assumptions with rapidly emerging facts. Brooke reached for Sarah's phone, scrolling through articles with growing amazement. "This doesn't make sense. These restaurants are upscale, sophisticated. The reviews talk about innovative cuisine and exceptional service standards." Her tone suggested that sophisticated restaurants were somehow incompatible with my identity, as if success in hospitality required a different type of person than the one she knew me to be. David leaned over to examine the phone screen, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching awe. "Wait, I know these places. Meridian Grove is supposed to be impossible to get reservations at. My company tried to book a client dinner there last month, and they were booked solid for 3 months. 4 months now," I corrected automatically. "We're booking into March for weekend dinners." The casual correction seemed to hit harder than the initial revelation, demonstrating intimate knowledge of operational details that only an owner would possess. Uncle Kevin bent to gather the scattered business cards, examining them with new understanding. "These are your cards, your business contact information." Marcus had quietly positioned himself near the dining room entrance, ready to provide professional distance while remaining available if needed. His presence served as living proof of my claims, a witness whose credibility couldn't be questioned. "Ms. Hoffman started with a single location 4 years ago," Marcus offered when the silence became uncomfortable. "She's built something remarkable through vision, hard work, and commitment to excellence." My mother shook her head repeatedly, as if physical movement could help her brain process the information. "But Zara, if this is true, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling?" The question revealed her assumption that I'd deliberately deceived them, rather than simply stopped correcting their misperceptions. She couldn't conceive that their own behavior had discouraged me from sharing my achievements. "I tried to tell you, early on," I said calmly. "But conversations kept sliding past it. You'd already decided what my life looked like, and contradictory information didn't seem to register." Aunt Linda returned to her seat with obvious relief, finally able to stop carrying the secret burden of her kitchen discovery. "I found out a few minutes ago," she admitted. "Marcus mentioned Zara's restaurant expertise, and she told me the truth." Brooke's expression shifted through multiple emotions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and something that might have been anger. "So you've been lying to us for years?" "I've been answering your questions honestly," I replied. "When you asked if I worked at a restaurant, I said yes. When you asked about my hours and responsibilities, I described them accurately. You just interpreted everything through your own assumptions." Tyler nodded vigorously. "She's right. I remember conversations where she mentioned business decisions and staffing challenges, but everyone assumed she was talking about being an employee, not an owner." Sarah pulled up more articles on her phone, sharing them around the table like evidence in a court case. "Look at this interview where she talks about sustainable sourcing and community partnerships, and this one about her scholarship program for culinary students." Each new piece of information seemed to land like a physical blow, forcing my family to confront how completely they'd misunderstood my life and achievements. David examined an article about my company's expansion plans, his business background, helping him understand the financial implications. "The revenue projections in this piece suggest you're running a multi-million-dollar operation. This isn't small business ownership. This is significant entrepreneurial success." His recognition carried weight because it came from someone with corporate finance experience, someone who understood the difference between owning a small cafe and building a restaurant empire. Uncle Kevin slowly straightened, his golf stories and business bragging forgotten in the face of evidence that his youngest niece had achieved more than he'd ever imagined. Zara, if this is accurate, you're more successful than most people at this table. The admission was grudging but honest, revealing how their evening of casual dismissal and condescension had been based on completely false premises. Brooke continued, scrolling through articles, her pharmaceutical sales achievements suddenly seeming less impressive in comparison to building and managing 3 successful restaurants. The employee benefits package described here is better than what my Fortune 500 company offers. We provide comprehensive health coverage, profit sharing, educational support, and advance opportunity, I confirmed. Happy employees create better guest experiences, which drives long-term success. My mother finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. The community involvement mentioned in these articles, the charitable work, the partnerships with local farms, that's the kind of giving back we've always talked about as important. Her observation was accurate but painful, highlighting how she'd missed my actual contributions while praising the concept of community involvement in abstract terms. I host 4 major fundraising dinners annually, I said quietly. Last year, we raised over $200,000 for various local causes. The scholarship program has supported 37 students through culinary school. The numbers hung in the air, quantifying impact that dwarfed most of their own charitable activities. While they wrote checks to established organizations, I'd built systems that created ongoing community benefit. Aunt Linda looked around the table with obvious discomfort. We've been horrible tonight, haven't we? Talking about success and achievement while treating Zara like she couldn't possibly understand business concepts. The acknowledgement was brave and accurate, though it also highlighted how obvious their dismissive behavior had been to outside observers. Sarah showed her phone to Uncle Kevin, displaying photos from one of my restaurant's charity events. This is from the homeless shelter fundraiser last month. She's not just successful, she's using her success to help people. Tyler added his own observation. While everyone was talking about networking and relationship building, Zara was actually doing it. Building real partnerships that create community value. Their teenage perspectives carried particular weight because they had no investment in maintaining adult egos or family hierarchies. They could see the situation clearly and call it honestly. Brooke set down the phone and looked directly at me for the first time all evening with something approaching respect. Why didn't you correct us when we talked about business success? Like you wouldn't understand. You could have said something. The question revealed her assumption that asserting myself was simple, that demanding recognition was just a matter of speaking up louder. Because I got tired of fighting for acknowledgement. From people who should have believed in me automatically, I said. Because correcting people's assumptions became exhausting when they were determined to maintain them. David nodded slowly, his corporate experience helping him understand the dynamics of being underestimated. I've seen this in business settings. People form impressions early and filter everything else through those preconceptions. Uncle Kevin gathered the business cards into a neat stack, studying my contact information as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus, when you mentioned your owner earlier, you were talking about Zara. Marcus nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. Ms. Hoffman founded the company and oversees all operations. She's one of the most respected restaurateurs in Portland. The professional endorsement carried authority that family members couldn't dismiss or minimize. Marcus had no reason to exaggerate, no family politics to navigate, no emotional investment in the outcome. My mother reached for my hand across the table, her touch hesitant and apologetic. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. We've been blind, haven't we? The apology was genuine but incomplete, addressing the symptom rather than the underlying problem. They were sorry for misunderstanding, but not necessarily ready to examine why they'd been so resistant to seeing me clearly. I don't need apologies, I said gently. I need recognition going forward. I need to be seen for who I actually am, rather than who you assumed I would become. Brooke closed her eyes, clearly processing the full scope of her evening's condescension. The things I said about understanding business, about working toward dreams, you must have wanted to throw something at me. The thought crossed my mind, I admitted with a slight smile. Especially when you explained client relations to someone who's built 3 businesses on exactly those principles. Tyler laughed, breaking some of the tension. This is the best family dinner ever. Like watching someone discover they've been lecturing Einstein about physics. Sarah giggled in agreement. Or explaining music to Mozart. Their teenage perspective helped lighten the mood while maintaining the essential truth. My family had spent years underestimating someone who'd exceeded all their measures of success. Uncle Kevin stood and walked to his bar, returning with an expensive bottle of champagne. I think this calls for a proper toast to achievements we should have celebrated years ago. The gesture was well-intentioned, but felt slightly performative, an attempt to quickly transition from embarrassment to celebration without fully processing what had happened. As Uncle Kevin worked the champagne cork, Aunt Linda asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. What happens now? How do we move forward from this? The question was more complex than she probably realized, touching on years of family dynamics that couldn't be resolved with a single conversation. We start over, I said simply. We start with the truth and build from there. The champagne. Cork popped with festive enthusiasm, and Uncle Kevin poured glasses for everyone, including proper crystal for Tyler and me instead of the plastic cups we'd been using. To Zara, he said, raising his glass with genuine pride. To success we were too blind to see and achievements that make the whole family proud. The toast was better than his earlier version, though it still carried the implication that pride was conditional on recognition rather than automatic for family. As we raised our glasses, I caught Marcus preparing to leave with the catering team. He paused at the dining room entrance, offering a professional nod that somehow conveyed both respect and encouragement. Thank you for excellent service tonight, I called to him. I'll see you Monday for our meeting. Looking forward to it, Ms. Hoffman, he replied with a smile. Enjoy the rest of your evening. His departure felt symbolic, the end of pretense, and the beginning of honest family dynamics. No more hiding, no more assumptions, no more comfortable fictions that served no one well. Brooke approached me as conversations resumed around the table, her expression serious and apologetic. I owe you a real apology, not just for tonight, but for years of not seeing you clearly. Her acknowledgement was more meaningful than Uncle Kevin's champagne toast because it recognized ongoing patterns rather than just evening-specific offenses. I'd like to visit your restaurants, she continued. As a customer, not as family expecting special treatment, I want to see what you've built. The request felt genuine, motivated by curiosity rather than obligation. For the first time all evening, she was treating me as someone worth learning from rather than someone to be managed or pitied. My mother joined us, her eyes still showing traces of tears. I keep thinking about all the times you tried to share your successes and we just didn't hear you. How frustrating that must have been. Her recognition was important, though it would need to translate into changed behavior going forward. Awareness was just the first step toward different family dynamics. As the evening wound down and people began discussing departure logistics, Sarah approached with her phone still full of restaurant articles. Would you be willing to talk to my culinary arts class sometime? She asked. About entrepreneurship and building businesses? I think they'd be inspired by your story. The request was touching and practical, recognizing that my experience could benefit others facing similar challenges. It also represented the kind of recognition I'd been hoping for from family, seeing my achievements as valuable and worth sharing. Tyler gathered our coats, grinning with obvious satisfaction. This was better than any movie, watching everyone's faces when they realized their assumptions were completely wrong. As we prepared to leave, Uncle Kevin approached with genuine emotion. Zara, I hope you'll give us a chance to do better, to be the family you deserve. The sentiment was lovely, though change would require sustained effort rather than good intentions. Years of patterns don't shift overnight, no matter how dramatic the revelation. But as I hugged everyone goodbye, receiving the kind of respect and recognition that had been missing all evening, I felt something shift in our family dynamics. Not complete transformation, but the beginning of possibility. The drive home felt different than the morning's journey. Same roads, same apartment destination, but everything had changed. I was no longer the family member trying to prove her worth. I was someone whose worth had finally been recognized, whose achievements could no longer be dismissed or minimized. My phone buzzed with texts as I reached my apartment. Sarah had sent links to culinary programs she was researching. Tyler shared a thoughtful message about family dynamics and personal growth. Even Brooke sent a brief note requesting information about restaurant reservations. The evening had ended very differently than it began. Instead of hiding my success, I was finally free to own it completely. Instead of accepting diminished expectations, I could demand the recognition I'd earned. Sometimes the people who underestimate you most are the ones who think they know you best. But truth has a way of surfacing eventually, reshaping relationships, and forcing everyone to see more clearly. The storm was over, and I was no longer the person seeking shelter. I was the one who'd built something substantial enough to weather anything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.